What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video we're going to be talking about Immortal X-Men #2 by Kieran Gillen and Lucas Wernick. And in this video, we're going to talk about how the Quiet Council is going to deal with Selene unleashing an entire Kaiju upon Krakoa, as well as whether or not Hope Summers is willing to accept her place on Krakoa to once again be the mutant messiah. We're gonna talk about all this and more right now, but first, let's hit that intro.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
So the main thing that is focused on in this comic is the fact that Hope Summers is starting to accept her place within the Quiet Council, even though technically she's only been a part of the Quiet Council for a scant few minutes, but she is starting to recognize that she has a place on Krakoa that is more than just being a part of the Five. And even though the Five are revered as being like the most sacred mutants on the entire island because of their ability to resurrect dead mutants, all of that aside, Hope realizes that the Quiet Council needs her because she is willing to make decisions that no one else is able to. In the previous issue, it was recognized that Selene was up for a position on the Quiet Council, but was spurned by them, and she took it rather personally. She felt that she brought something special to the Quiet Council that no one else was able to bring. She was more than capable of bringing a knowledge of magic and sorcery and a deeper understanding of the mystic arts to the Quiet Council than anyone else could. Now, it is actually brought up in this issue that they could have just asked Magic. However, Colossus quickly shoots that down because, as he knows, Magic wouldn't want to be on the council because she likes to be active. She doesn't want to sit in the middle of boring meetings and all that other stuff. She wants to get out and get her hands dirty, which is why she would prefer to be a captain rather than a member of the Quiet Council. That said, Magic does factor into this, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But just to kind of reiterate why all this is happening is that Selene, she is unhappy. She feels that if she unleashes this Kaiju, which is made from the external gate, which was technically destroyed, but we must remember that the external gate is created from the bones and the other remnants of the other externals. She's using that as a weapon against Krakoa because Krakoa is not able to fight against Kaiju. Though it is brought up with a very interesting nod towards the Summers protocols regarding Kaiju, which is a very funny little aside. I mean, it's meant to be taken seriously, but there are some clear and obvious jokes in there about the different types of Kaiju the X-Men have gone up against on a regular basis, and even some stuff that's happened recently in Jerry Duggan's X-Men. That said, it's going to fall back to Hope because no one can take this thing down. Even Mr. Sinister, who uncharacteristically tries to have a heroic moment using what is Chimera formula. He's been developing chimeras, as we know. We saw the Chimera clone of Tarn the Uncaring back in Zeb Wells' Hellions, so we know that he has the ability to make these things. But he has this neat little formula that essentially turns him into Weapon H. It's said to be a mixture of various different other mutants' genes, and we don't really know all of the finer points about who all is a part of this crazy mixture of mutant that he has put together, but it is definitely safe to say it is volatile, and it's not something he can sustain, as he does wind up exploding later after using it. Though it doesn't kill him, he just turns back to normal. But now recognizing that even when you kill this Kaiju, it comes back to life, forever regenerating itself and continuing to rain down destruction upon Krakoa itself, it becomes obvious to Hope that she has to be the one to make the tough call, and she does end up using Magic's ability to teleport herself somewhere after having a very brief conversation with Destiny, who, as we know, can see potential futures. And one of the potential futures that she saw was an image of Selene somewhere else in the world, specifically in London. And what's going on here is that she has recognized that Selene has gone to throw in her lot with Coven Akaba. Now, for those who are not familiar, Coven Akaba is a group of humans, not mutants. I know some people might think of Coven Akaba as being the same as Clan Akaba, a group that initially revered the mutant apocalypse. They are not the same. Coven Akaba is a group that splintered off from Clan Akaba. They actually revere the banishment of Apocalypse from Clan Akaba. If you have been keeping up with Teenie Howard's Excalibur, Coven Akaba has factored in mighty heavily over the course of that series, being led by Ruben Brousseau, who is one of Britain's foremost anti-mutant legislators. And right now, she's throwing in her lot with them, and we don't really know why Coven Akaba is welcoming her in with open arms, because they are very adamant in their anti-mutant rhetoric, so the fact that they're actually welcoming Selene, who, once again, is a whole-ass mutant, they welcomed her in. Now, they may be viewing her as more of a sorceress, because, she is a sorceress, as well as an energy vampire, but she is, at the end of the day, still a mutant, but they seem to be revering her in such a way that makes one wonder, what's the deal? But we don't really get an answer in all that. All we know is that Selene knew at some point the Quiet Council and Krakoa were gonna have to come to her in order to figure out how to stop the Kaiju, that she knew they were going to reach out to her and that it was only a matter of time. And then she would ultimately get what she wants. Something that the Quiet Council was initially thinking, maybe even considering giving her, maybe trying to figure out some kind of a way to placate her and keep her from unleashing this Kaiju on the island. But it has made Krakoa recognize they do have a deficiency when it comes to magic, something that it does seem like they will eventually at some point try to address. But getting back to Hope, Hope borrows magic's ability to open gateways and portals, and she sends herself to London and assassinates Selene based off the information Destiny gave her, telling her that she would be standing by a window at a very specific time in London, and Hope, borrowing magic's power, does exactly that. She sends herself to London, pulls out the sniper rifle, and 360 no-scope aimbots her. No problem. Selene is dead, and she is immediately pushed to the front of the resurrection queue, where Exodus is able to reach into her mind and find out exactly what it is she knows and how to get rid of that Kaiju and send it back to where it originally came. And once they get what they want, Exodus immediately snaps her neck and kills her. Now the real question is, what are they going to do with Selene now that they've gotten rid of her monster? Truth of the matter is, they don't really know. For the most part, everyone else seems to be of the belief that she broke one of Krakoa's sacred laws, respect this sacred land, which she did most certainly disrespect that sacred land, so she should go into the hole. Go hang out with Sabretooth. And even when Xavier asks Hope what she would do about it, she actually just kind of says, nah, I'll think about it later. I don't think it's something we should deal with right this second, which is basically her way of saying no in the most polite way humanly possible without actually saying no or even being committed to yes for that matter. That said, Hope is really leaning into more of her role now, and even though, yes, she doesn't like being called the Messiah the way Exodus likes to often refer to her as, it does kind of seem like she's warming up to it in some way, or at least not getting as angry or as annoyed by it as she was initially. Initially, she didn't like it. She hated being called the Mutant Messiah. She hated that everyone believed in her so fiercely in that regard, but now it seems like, at least in a more playful way, she's like, no, okay, fine. Sure, whatever. She doesn't necessarily accept it, but she's not necessarily going to try and stop it either. Before we get into what's going on with Sinister, I do want to say I appreciate how they kind of threw in a little wrinkle with Exodus's powers that I'm not sure if it's ever been brought up before. Exodus seems to be incredibly surprised by this, and I think it's something that's even been hinted at before in previous comics, so I don't have the evidence to back that up. However, I will say I thought it was interesting they put a little wrinkle on Exodus's abilities that is very similar to the Shi'ar character Gladiator, that his power is based on his belief in himself, only with this case, with Exodus, it's a little bit more than that. It's not just his belief in himself, but also other people's faith in him that makes him even more powerful. It's something that, I feel like has always been kind of hinted at and danced around, but never 100% actually stated. Once again, I'm not going to claim to be the foremost expert on all things Exodus, but in all the comics I've ever read with Exodus, it was never something that was just like, no, this is a hard line, this is what it is. Again, even within this comic, it seems to be news to Exodus. Now, getting back to what's going on with Selene, because there is still more going on here. Sinister still thinks that she should be resurrected, that they should actually bring her back because she would be useful. Not necessarily saying they should put her on the Quiet Council, but they should try and figure out how she was able to wield such power that no mutant on the island can wield. Even with Magic being as adept in, well, you know, magic as she is, even Magic, I don't think, could do something on this magnitude without completely throwing herself over to, you know, her darker nature. But I do find it interesting that Destiny seems to believe that if Sinister was to reach out to Selene, that it wouldn't end well for him. Not really saying exactly what it would be that would happen to him, but it just wouldn't be the best idea. And Destiny, as she walks away, even says something to him about being on the same side. This is a callback to the first issue, where about roughly 100 years ago, Destiny and Sinister had met with one another, and this is also where Sinister had that mysterious, seemingly heart attack type scenario go on, where he began fainting onto the floor, and the red diamond that he is known for on his forehead began to appear. And not only that, he kept saying the same phrase over and over again: "You're a ghost, before seemingly dying, or at the very least falling unconscious. Something very similar happens yet again, only this time it's not happening to Sinister, it's happening to Destiny. Destiny is still reeling from that creature existing on the Earth plane because it disrupted space and time, and as one would imagine, with Destiny being able to see the future, it would mess with her probably more than just about anyone else. And she mentions that she hasn't felt this way in about roughly a century, which is going back to the meeting that she had with Sinister. Destiny seems to know something, and while we're never exactly told what it is, there is something we can maybe possibly glean from the conversation she had with Sinister leading up to him having that sudden attack. Before Destiny whispers in his ear the message that activates that attack within him, he says something about a Mr. Elgar's Nimrod, something that had unsettled her. This is very likely something to do with that. By this point, she already knows about Nimrod. For those that don't know what I'm talking about here, they're referring to Edward Elgar, and there's a piece of music that was written by Edward Elgar called Nimrod. So it's not saying that, oh no, it's some great Nimrod revelation. No, it's just it's something about it that had unsettled her. So very likely, yes, she already has had her vision of Nimrod in the future. She even goes on to say that war is coming. Whatever it is, she hasn't told anyone else, not even Mystique. Mystique has no clue what it is that Destiny knows, and Destiny's even said herself that she hopes she never has to tell her. This actually echoes a sinister secret from Immortal X-Men #1 that stated that Destiny would get a major revelation coming. You know, she hasn't had a major one in over a century, which is going back to the time when Sinister and Destiny met. That she's having one now, and something tells me that revelation is finally happening. Now, this could be in relation to her knowing what Sinister is up to regarding all the Mora clones that he has, or it could even be how using all those clones is gonna mess everything up. I think this because recently Kieran Gillen had an interview with AIPT Comics, and in that interview, he actually says, and I quote, "What Sinister is doing, it affects the timeline badly." And then he goes on to say, okay, serious answer, it's a quick save. The timeline resets to the moment that clone was created and had their gene activated. Whenever Sinister wants to create a save slot, he makes a new clone. He can choose where to go back to by killing whatever clone he wishes. He's save scumming his way through the Marvel Universe. To make it a little bit more in plainer English, each of those clones, that's why each of them is aged at a different rate. We noticed that some appeared to be fully grown adults, some seemed to be, more like teenagers or maybe preteen, and there was even one that appeared to be an infant. He can kill whichever one he wants and go back to whatever point in time that clone was connected to. And apparently he's already done this 25 previous times, as was stated in Immortal X-Men #1, where he was going through his logs and he noted that he had 25, because there have been 25 different versions of Sinister previous to that one, and that's not even including all the other versions of Sinister that were already out before that, and we don't even know if this connects to the other Sinister that we saw in X-Men #11 last week, the one that turned out to be who was behind the mask of Dr. Stasis. The one with the club on his head, as opposed to a diamond. Meaning that there's at least 3 other ones that might also be calling themselves Dr. Stasis, or maybe they're connected to this whole Judas thing that's going on. It's hard to say at this point. Either way, he's doing exactly what Gillen said. He's save scumming, which for those who know what save scumming is, it's saving over and over again at very, very, very specific points in your game and going back to them the second that something doesn't go the way that you want it to. It's a term that if you play games like XCOM, you'd be incredibly familiar with. Lots of people save scum in those games when their characters get killed, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm guilty of it as well. I've done it plenty of times when characters that I've either invested a lot of time in or characters that I've named after people that I care about end up dying in that game. So yeah, I totally get it, and that's exactly what Sinister's doing. Anyway, that's everything I wanted to talk about with Immortal X-Men number 2. This issue definitely hit some pretty interesting notes for me, and it's definitely setting up something big. Something definitely is happening with Destiny. That opening scene from number 1 is not something that's gonna go, left out in the cold the way the Mora was back with House of X number 2, and I definitely don't think that the whole deal with Mora's clones is also gonna be something that's gonna be left out in the cold, and I actually think those clones are gonna wind up paying dividends down the road in ways that are very terrifying. I definitely think that, especially everything going on with the evil Mora, I wouldn't be surprised if in some way, shape, form, or fashion, they use this as a way to get the original Mora back. I mean, it wouldn't be the original Mora, but maybe they could somehow, some way get Mora back on their side, maybe get a good version of Mora, though I think that would be very difficult to do considering how these Moras are being used. But don't think for 5 seconds that if one of those Moras doesn't get free, or let's say Mora herself finds out about them, don't think for 5 seconds this isn't going to turn out bad for everybody involved. As Gillen even said in that statement I read earlier, it affects the timeline badly. But anyways, let me know what you guys thought about Immortal X-Men number 2. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.